related to financial incentives and weight management, everything else. I know how healthcare works from the inside out. I actually understand how that operates. I actually studied public health for a brief period of time at Harvard. I've seen how these systems work. I've seen who these people are. I remember giving a talk at a Harvard public health ethics conference, and I gave some talk about Ayn Rand, and nobody knew what I was talking about. It was like a very absurd situation, trying to talk to somebody about ethics in public health. Like, that's actually almost a joke in and of itself. So I'm not saying these things just to be flippant. I've actually spent a bunch of time, and I want to share some of this and try to get people to start thinking about this, about how profoundly programmed we've been, and how much, everything in our lives. Why do we work 9 to 5? Why do we eating 3 meals a day? Like, you really start questioning everything. And when you start questioning and then you start doing research, you find that most of the world has been structured, either with malice or to benefit a certain group of people, but it has nothing to do with, this idea of, well, things are there that way for a good reason. It must have been well thought through a long time ago, and now it is what it is. It turns out, as I'll show you today, at least with nutrition, no, it was not well thought out. And it wasn't just people thought they were doing the right thing and they made a mistake. I want to stress that very clearly, because certainly we learn things all the time. We make mistakes. That's how you learn, and that's how you grow. And as you're about to see, that is not what has happened with nutrition. This is what we thought at the time, but now we know better, and now we made a correction. That's not true. So the whole idea of eating 3 meals a day, I went through this slide yesterday. Is that necessary? Is it a modern construct? Well, spoiler, it's a complete scam that started in the 19th century. And you actually had people like Henry Ford and others that were pushing this. They were pushing this because they were moving towards having different shifts at work. And so this was all about optimizing work schedules for factory employees. There was no aspect of this that was based on human health. So I want to stress that again, that it was not based on science. What you had industrialists that then pushed the USDA, who later adopted it as guidelines, but not on the basis of science. And what you find with a lot of this is, this is certainly true with Rockefeller and obviously Bill Gates. There's a long history of this where you basically have people that want to shift the policy, and then they end up being the ones that fund the scientists, fund the research schools, and then also maneuver and get their bureaucrats in charge of these public health institutions. And so this is, so this goes back a long time. But if you've ever thought about it before, and you've probably you eat 3 meals a day. That is what most people do. There's no basis for that. So as you go through fasting and you start asking these questions, like, yeah, well, okay, all right, that has nothing to do. And even if you bought the argument of, well, that's what it needed to be like back in the 3-shift industrial day, most people do not work in that environment. So why do we still have it? Why are we still pushing this same thing? And it goes literally all the way back to this, and nobody thought to question it. So again, the industrial leaders pushed for standardized meal times. The USDA adopted the guidelines. Was anybody ever held accountable? No, most people still operate with this. Most people still believe this. And while there's been some shift in eating patterns, the 3 meals is still the thing. And yet many people actually profited from it, like General Mills and Kellogg. And now, the packaged food market is a $377 billion a year industry. Lie number 2. So, if we were doing this live, I'd do a show of hands. How many of you have heard or believe that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? I know I grew up thinking that. In fact, part of my passion for this too is then you get pissed at yourself going through this, knowing that you bought it or were subjected to it. Like, my parents didn't know any better. I would eat sugar cereal every day. Think about what they trained us to do. You should eat Fruity Pebbles. You should eat Fruit Loops. You should eat these breakfast cereals, which are, now genetically modified grains plus sugar. And that's the most important meal of the day. And that you have to eat 3 meals of the day. Expand it out further. What has the government done? The government through schools has gotten more and more into this as well. Now we need to have a Head Start program. Now we need to have kids in school earlier, before they're 7, when they can be directly programmed with no conscious filtering. And then we need to actually control their food. We need to use government money to push this unhealthy food while we're also getting them in a state where they can be conditioned and programmed. It's that infuriating. It is all gaslighting. There is no basis for the idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, or that it's even an important meal of the day. So then ask yourself, well, where did this come from? This is why I get upset when I hear, RFK is going to bring back gold standard science to public health. There is no gold standard science. There is no golden age. It's been bullshit the whole time. So who was responsible for breakfast, the most important meal? Well, it was the cereal companies. It was Kellogg's. It was General Mills. And again, the USDA has been a captured entity forever. I mean, from the beginning. I mean, again, there wasn't this point where it was ever serving the function people have been propagandized to believe that it did. Has anybody ever been held accountable for this? No. Again, it's not even acknowledged. If I were to ask you to raise your hand, do you think breakfast is the most important meal of the day? Or have you heard that this is still the narrative that's being pushed? Because it is being pushed. So nobody's been held accountable. Kellogg's did $15.3 billion in revenue in 2023. Global cereal market is $37.4 billion, all driven by this myth. So first we got you with 3 squares a day, and now the most important one is breakfast. And here we are. That's how this got to be that way. The next one, and I had to deal with this as well. This has negatively impacted me. And I talked about this yesterday. Low-fat diets are healthy. That was the big push. Fat is bad. And it's this skinny lie that made us fat. And I used the story yesterday when I was overweight as a kid because, I was eating 3 square meals a day, and I was eating, breakfast cereal as the most important meal of the day. Well, you do that, guess what? You're going to be overweight. So then we go to a nutritionist. My parents take me to a nutritionist, and the nutritionist says, you have to have a low-fat diet. And here, go get these Snackwell cookies. That literally pointed me to the cookie section. So I already got fat because I'm eating the cereal that they pushed on me. And the solution to this is that I can't eat fat. I need to go eat cookies. I'm not even making this up. This was a registered nutritionist, who worked with a doctor. I mean, and this isn't a unique case. This is the standard. This is how all this works. These nutritionists actually think that they're helping people. They don't know anything about nutrition. Doctors, as I had mentioned, I think on the first day, a doctor only goes through 22 hours of nutrition studies their entire medical school career. So these people, this is why when I said, if they say go ask your doctor about fasting, your doctor's never heard about fasting. Fasting isn't even in a curriculum. So you go to your doctor's like, I don't know, sounds risky to me. They have no information about this. But what they've been doing is peddling things like, low-fat diet, for which, again, there's no scientific basis. And in fact, there is some manipulation and propaganda around it. There's this guy, Ansel Keys. Ansel Keys was involved with the American Heart Association. There's a great video. I should have put a link to it on here. I think Cato Institute actually has a video on YouTube. There are some resources on this talking about this guy, Ansel Keys. He basically manipulated the data around the link between fat and heart disease. And this is the entire basis of the low-fat narrative, the entire basis of eggs are bad, all because of one guy associated with the American Heart Association who intentionally manipulated the data. Was he held accountable? No. He was put on the front cover of Time magazine. So while they've made adjustments, actually, I can't even say they've made adjustments. Don't follow any public health guidelines. The next diet, called the Lancet diet, suggests that you shouldn't eat red meat. It actually has added sugar in as something that you should have daily, which there is no sugar is basically a poison. And so no one ever gets punished for this. And miraculously, when they come up with new health guidelines, they're actually worse. But the new health guidelines with the Lancet diet, here's the key with these guidelines. They don't even intend or state that they're prioritizing human health. It's part of the Agenda 2030. So when they're looking at developing nutritional policies, they're looking at the impact on the globe, the impact on the environment. So they're actually recommending insect protein. They're recommending a reduction to almost zero of red meat, and they're actually putting in added sugar. And they state that they're trying, this is like a holistic Agenda 2030 thing. They're not even stating that they're trying to optimize your health. So if you thought, which I'm sure a lot of people did in the 90s, people that saw the food pyramid in a health textbook and saw all this stuff, you probably thought that it was based on gold standard science and that the intent of the nutritional guidelines was to improve your health. It was never the intent. That has never been the motivation, which is why when I say boycott public health, literally boycott public health. They don't even have the intention of improving your health. The probability of you finding good information there is almost zero. So yeah, the low-fat market just absolutely ballooned. And so it's $91 billion by 2023. The American Heart Association got $300,000 a year for adding a healthy choice tick. This is the other thing. You can't trust any of the things that you see, and you definitely can't trust government food labeling either. They'll come up with a different way to say genetically modified. It's now bio something. They just changed the language because the language is being written by the ConAgra and Archer Daniels Midland. So the people that are actually, the government shouldn't be involved in food labeling at all. We have a whole debate right now where you have like this whole RFK regime is, well, we need informed consent, and informed consent comes from getting good information through government. There's no reason to think we're going to get good information through government. We need a consumer choice. We need a free market solution for this. But it turns out you have impediments for even trying to provide this kind of information as a private entity, because then it's not following USDA guidelines. So they actually prohibit and prevent and make it difficult for free market solutions for this, while absolutely putting forward propaganda and labeling that is unuseful. The last one that I have for today is that carbs are the base of a healthy diet. I'm not even kidding. This food pyramid has probably killed more people than the Holocaust. I actually looked at this up today, with AI. I mean, the number of people that have died in the United States from obesity, type 2 diabetes, and I have all these graphs because my company, which was an incentive-based program to help employers help their employees lose weight and save money at the same time, I had these CDC maps that showed the growth of obesity. You may have seen them. These horrifying animated maps. And we went from basically 1985, where no one was morbidly obese and a very small percentage were overweight, to now like over 80% of Americans are overweight or obese. And now actually the obese category may have even be higher than the overweight category. Well, I mean, this started with the introduction of this food pyramid, which absolutely destroys your insulin levels by putting 6 to 11 servings of carbs at the base. If you eat that diet, you're always going to be hungry. I mean, this is fats. Yes, fats have more calories than carbs, but if you eat fat, you will actually feel satisfied. All this is doing with this at the base is spiking your insulin levels. So you're always going to be hungry. You're always going to want to eat more, and you are not going to obtain nutrients. So this has literally killed, based on, doing a little bit of analysis, like 12 million people have probably died from unnecessary diseases caused by poor nutritional guidance pushed. It wasn't just suggested, it was pushed. I remember this stuff being in public school health textbooks. So who is responsible? It was the USDA, influenced by the corn industry, the grain industry, and by actually the same people, Kellogg's and General Mills. Has anybody been held accountable? No, absolutely. Not a single person was fired. This is why I don't believe in public health. And again, I'm going back to, this isn't a situation where we had gold standard science that made a mistake, or where there's new gold standard science that replaced the old gold standard science because we learned more. That has nothing to do with any of this. We have bad things that were put in there through the capture of regulatory agencies, which, by the way, they will always be captured. RFK is not going to fix this. There is no scenario in which you don't end up with having regulatory capture. This is why you move all of this out of the government sector and let the market solve all of these problems. You're not going to have, it's like this idea, like you're going to have these dragnet style, like people at the FDA and the USDA who are passionate about government food labeling. It's never happened before. It's never going to happen again. And we're in 2025. We have decentralization. We have AI. We have different technologies. It's absurd to even have the USDA or the FDA, but no one was held accountable. And then they came up with My Plate, which is equally absurd from the original food pyramid. And as I said before, this Lancet food pyramid is worse than the 1992 food pyramid because it has low to no meat, sugar, and insect protein. So don't trust this, but hopefully as you're seeing this, I hope you're getting as angry about this as I am, because I've got 5 more to go through tomorrow. I guess I have 1 more for today. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. And this is just nutrition. Nutrition is not some outlier where it's this like, oh, well, this only happens within this field. The last one I have for today is red meat causes heart disease. So this has been pushed heavily for a long time. And now it gets pushed, even though the evidence shows that that's not the case. The actual problem was processed foods, not red meat itself. They haven't switched this because they want to keep this narrative, because the new narrative with the UN 2030 agenda is that red meat is bad for environmental purposes. So they just don't want us eating red meat. It's never had anything to do with health. The first spin on this was that it caused heart disease, and now they're not even going to state that it's about health issues. They're going to say it's about the environment. They're going to say it's about methane. They're going to say it's about cow farts. So who funded this? Well, the sugar industry funded this. This is also an extension, this argument, of the American Heart Association and Ansel Keys. So the same guy that I mentioned before that pushed the low-fat diet, well, this is where this got caught up in that, because red meat is high in fat and cholesterol, and so it's in the same category as eggs, and it's a cause of heart attack. There's no evidence for this. It's a fascinating story. I may even play the parts of an interview in future lectures about kind of the history with this Ansel Keys guy. So, but this Ansel Keys, this stuff goes back decades. This isn't like, oh, so many people are like, oh, well, gee, this just got bad with COVID and Fauci recently. This did not just get bad. And again, a lot of this happened. A lot of the research that I did was in a fasted state, doing a 38-day fast, the last time. I now always take the approach of, okay, I'm not going to look at just what this recent example of where we may have cronyism or a captured entity. I then go back and say, what is the history of the FDA? What is the history of public health? Where did these organizations start? Who were the original people? What was their founding mission? And every time I go back and do this, public health and the World Health Organization and everything like this was very much driven by eugenics. It was very much driven by population control from the get-go. You actually had Aldous Huxley's brother was the first head of UNESCO, the science arm of the UN. He was a hardcore eugenicist, hardcore for population control. This was the beginning of the organization. And so the way I like to summarize it is this: once you learn that these organizations that they manage to propagandize, like the FBI. The FBI, it's like the men in gray or men in black or whatever it is that are standing up for our rights. These G-men, and they've had TV shows. I guess they have TV shows on it now. I don't have TV, but I saw that there's like a whole franchise of shows called FBI, and they had them decades ago, even when TV was black and white, glorifying the FBI. When you actually study the FBI, you find out that J. Edgar Hoover, who headed it, was running a blackmail organization, and he himself was being blackmailed by the mafia. That was the beginning of the FBI. Go back and study the history of the CIA, study the history of these organizations. So they started out with bad intent, and then they've had no accountability and no feedback loop. So there's no way these organizations have gotten better. There is no history of an organization that started out with malicious intent with no feedback becoming a useful, fruitful, and productive organization. And so this is true in all of these areas, but it's really true